Yo, what's going on, YouTube, and welcome to Goal Line Hockey. It's Kevin Forte, and today we're going to take a look at potential mock trades for a pair of big players in Winnipeg. Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck. There's been a lot of discussion about when these guys might get traded, what they're going to get traded for, who they're going to get traded to. We're going to discuss all of that in today's video. So now that we've seen the draft, free agency, a lot of things have played out, and it's kind of changed the landscape for the Jets for what teams are in or out on Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck. Those are their two guys. They've announced that they are not going to be re-signing in Winnipeg next season. They are UFAs next summer, and I think the Jets are trying to get on this as quick as they can to make those moves. And Kevin Cheveldayoff, we know he's very anti-making big trades and stuff, but in this situation, he has no choice. He has to find a way to move these guys and to get some value for them. So the first guy is obviously Mark Scheifele. Scheifele is a name that you look at. He's a top six center, potentially even a first-line center on some teams, and he's going to be expensive. Now, I think the price could change a little bit for the benefit of the team trading for him because there is a soft market. And I was able to come up with two teams, and even those two teams, I really wonder, like, how much interest is there genuinely in making this deal happen? So the first team is the Washington Capitals. Now, my idea for a framework for both of these teams to trade is a first-round pick, a top six prospect, and a defensive prospect. Not necessarily your top defensive prospect, not necessarily your top prospect, but a defensive prospect. And that's kind of what we're looking at here. So I was able to make a framework for both of these teams. Washington being the first one, a first-round pick next year, Connor McMichael and Vincent Iorio. I know that Caps fans are not going to like that deal. This is a really good group of players. Connor McMichael played really well for the Hershey Bears last season, and both those guys won a Calder Cup with the Hershey Bears in Chocolate Town. So there is that sentiment out there that, I think Caps fans are excited for what those guys can be at the NHL level based off what we saw from them in the minor leagues last season. But I think it's one of those things where you only have so much room. And yes, McMichael, 22 years old. He's an RFA next summer. But his numbers in Hershey were really good this year. He had 39 points in 57 games. He's played he played a lot of last season in Washington, 70 games last year with the Caps, only 6 this year with the Caps. Kind of more of just an emergency call-up, and he didn't pick up any points. So his AHL numbers definitely flourished this past season on a Calder Cup winning team in Hershey. So that's something to think about. Obviously, I think honestly, as much as people like McMichael, I think the idea of losing Vinny Iorio, their former second-round pick in 2021, is even more threatening. He picked up 22 points in 63 games. Former Brandon Wheat King, he's from Western Canada, 6'4", 200-pound defenseman. He's only 20 years old. So this is a guy that I think definitely is someone that the Capitals like. But when you look at the Caps' blue line right now, you've got John Carlson, Nick Jensen, TVR, Martin Fehervary, who they just re-signed, Rasmus Sandin, Alexander Alexiev, and Joel Edmondson. I would say that the core of this defense moving forward, you've got Alexiev, Fehervary, and probably Rasmus Sandin. Those three defensemen in particular definitely stand out to me. So is there room for Vinny Iorio as that fourth defenseman? And I think yes, there definitely is, because you look at the rest of that group. Vinny Iorio is not only the youngest defensive prospect, but he's really the only defensive prospect they have. The Hershey Bears, the rest of their defense is made up of Chase Prisky, Lucas Johansson, who's been around forever, Dylan McElrath, and Hardy Haman Akhtal. So I think the idea is we're going to see Vinny Iorio spend a lot of next season in Hershey with the Hershey Bears once again. And I think that at this point, that's a guy they don't want to trade. But if you're bringing in a guy like Mark Scheifele, you're looking at probably a guy like Kuznetsov probably going out the door. But I think they'd be okay with that, because you look at what you could be getting from a guy like Scheifele. That's someone that I think the Capitals would definitely be targeting. But the idea of trading both McMichael and Iorio, it's not great. It's not something you probably want to do. You could be willing to make a move like trading Alexi Protas. Maybe that's a guy that goes in the deal instead. So you're trading Iorio and Protas instead of McMichael, and you keep like LaPierre and McMichael in this deal. Maybe that's what they're looking to do. But I know that if Winnipeg's looking to make a deal, they're probably looking at Iorio going the other way from the Caps. And I know they probably wouldn't like that in Washington, but that's the reality of the situation here because Minnesota has an offer, and I think that Washington would definitely win this offer, would win this bid for Scheifele if these were the two offers. So Billy G is giving up a first-round pick next year, Marco Rossi, and Calen Addison. And that's probably the deal Minnesota's giving up here. So Marco Rossi has struggled to develop at the NHL level. He's had a lot of injury issues, and he just hasn't been healthy. He's had a lot of problems with, he had COVID and really hasn't recovered the way that everyone was hoping he would. And Calen Addison has had some interesting situations in Minnesota. He was held out of the lineup at the end of last season. They're keeping that coaching staff there in Minnesota. So there is a sentiment out there that Calen Addison already has 1 foot out the door. So it would make sense to trade both these guys. Yeah, that package isn't as good as what Washington would be willing to give up. And that's why I think, honestly, the more realistic trade here is the Minnesota pick. Because if Washington was willing to give up McMichael and Iorio, I think they get that deal done. And I think Iorio is absolutely the top player here. I honestly think Washington could even get away with trading a guy like Alexei Protas in this deal instead, alongside Iorio, and still being a better deal than Minnesota. But I think realistically, Minnesota would be willing to make this trade more so than Washington because A, Washington still has Kuznetsov. So unless they trade Kuznetsov and want to bring Scheifele in, it's kind of that 1-for-1, right? Like whatever they get in return for Kuznetsov, they also want to bring back with Scheifele, right? So Scheifele will be coming in. Well, let's put it this way. Let's say they trade Kuznetsov. Are they bringing in a top 4 defenseman? Well, now you don't need Iorio necessarily, right? And if it's prospects, well, now you're just swapping out McMichael or Protas and Iorio for whatever prospects they bring in a Kuznetsov trade, okay? Minnesota needs that center, right? They're not in a situation like Washington where we're moving this guy out and bringing this guy in. It's not like that. They could use him right now today. And the prospects aren't necessarily, yes, Rossi, a former first-round pick, top 10 draft pick, an Austrian forward that a lot of people had high hopes for, but his ceiling has definitely dropped a little since he was drafted. And Calen Addison has had some issues. He was a Penguins prospect back in the day that Billy G scouted in Pittsburgh, brought him into Minnesota. Things have been kind of shaky with him and their coaching staff there in Minnesota. So there's obviously the idea that could potentially be worthy of a trade. So honestly, I think realistically, I think Scheifele would be a better fit here. There was a lot of talk a couple years ago that Tomas Hertl could end up in Minnesota. They need a top 6 center. It's not a knock on guys like Freddie Gaudreau and guys like Joe Eriksson-Ek, but realistically, they need another top 6 center there in Minnesota if they want to make any noise in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And it might cost them some guys like Rossi and Calen Addison. So now we get to Connor Hellebuyck, and realistically, I think this trade is going to be a lot less exciting than I think Jets fans are hoping for. They're not going to get the deal they want. Let's put it that way, because the amount of suitors, even since the draft, have really diminished. Buffalo was once in the mix. San Jose, I think, was even in the mix at one point. Carolina, Toronto, all those teams have since gone out and picked up goalies. So now you're in a spot where realistically, I think it's New Jersey. New Jersey is the only team I think that could make this deal. Maybe Buffalo. And the reason I say that is they have the assets that a team like Winnipeg would want. Both those teams, Buffalo and New Jersey. And I've already made videos about this in the past, but I figured I'd update you guys on it. So if I'm New Jersey, I think the price tag, even at this point, isn't even that shimmering and exciting, but that's the deal on the table. So I'm going with defensive prospect Santeri Hatakka, Alex Holtz, and a first-round pick. Now, yes, that sounds like a lot of assets from New Jersey, but they're not necessarily the players that Jets fans are hoping for. And the reason I say that is Santeri Hatakka, 22 years old, left-shot defenseman. He's a 6th-round pick back in 2019, and this is a part of the deal that San Jose brought over in the Timo Meier trade. He's a decent prospect. You're looking more at 6 foot, 174 pounds. He's 22 years old. He just hasn't developed into that NHL body, but he's a good prospect still. He's only 22 years old, and he'll be an RFA next summer. He's still on his entry-level deal. Alexander Holtz is the interesting one because he really hasn't developed the way that Devils fans, I think, have been hoping for. The Stockholm Swedish defenseman, he was drafted 7th overall back in 2020. But his numbers in the NHL, he's only played 28 games in the NHL, and that's a former top 10 draft pick. Only 6 points in those 28 games, and his numbers in the AHL have been a lot better. Utica last season, he played 14 games. He had 11 points in 14 games, so decent numbers, but he hasn't been healthy. So this glow of a former top 10 overall pick isn't necessarily there compared to what it used to be. So yeah, he's a good prospect. You look at, he was drafted high. He's still 21 years old, but that shimmer is definitely glowing a little bit less than it was when he was drafted. And you throw in the first round pick, obviously, which we expect to be anywhere between 16 and 32 for the New Jersey Devils in the event that they make the playoffs. So a middling first round pick, a prospect that has high upside but hasn't been healthy the last couple years, and Santeri Hatakka, who just hasn't developed into that NHL frame and really doesn't have a ton of NHL experience. That's what you're looking at for Connor Hellebuyck. And if Buffalo's willing to throw an offer out there, we know that those guys are off the table. Guys like Peyton Krebs, JJ Peterka, Jack Quinn, none of those guys seem to be available. So unless you're looking at a first-round pick, Jacob Bryson, and something else, the deals just aren't out there for the Jets. The market has kind of dried up on Connor Hellebuyck. Yes, he is the best goalie available, but there's other goalies available right now. Guys like John Gibson out in Anaheim are available. So it makes it really difficult for the market for a guy like Hellebuyck to begin with, and the fact you've got other goalies available, it makes it all that much more difficult. So it's going to be interesting to see what Kevin Cheveldayoff can do here. Use a little bit of leverage here on the cap space of other teams to maybe make a deal work. But as of right now, the offers I don't think are going to be there for the Winnipeg Jets. But maybe they'll surprise me, right? Because the return they got for Dubois was really impressive by Cheveldayoff, and I think he's going to have to work a little more magic here down the stretch. But let me know what you guys think down below. What do you guys think of the Winnipeg Jets? Do you guys think they made some good moves, bad moves here? Let me know what you think the future is for guys like Hellebuyck and Scheifele down below. Guys, as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again next time.